Hi, this is Evan, and I'm your host for Wine Couch TV. As we so often do, today I'm going to pick a single grape type, talk a little bit about where it's from, taste a couple of wines, and talk to you about food pairings that go with it. I was going through my cellar and picking out some wines, and I came across an older bottle, well, not super old, but a bottle I'd had for a couple of months, of Carignan. I thought to myself, gosh, we haven't done that on air. Carignan as a grape is a grape that you find in France. You see it in other parts too, but it's primarily known in France and in Spain. What most people don't know about Carignan is that it's the second most planted red grape in the world, just after Grenache. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily planted for all the right reasons. When Carignan is excellent, and we'll taste a couple that are very good in a minute, it is just fabulous, full of pepper and dark berry and spice. But when it's not good, it's basically used for stretching out a lot of wines because it adds tannin, it adds acidity and all the other things, but it's other than that relatively innocuous, so we're not going to focus on that. Outside of France, which is its primary home, you find it in Spain, as I said before. Carignan actually was the original name for it before it went over to France, but we also find it a little bit in the region around Rioja, where it goes under the name of Mazuelo, and it's a blending grape that they use to make those great red wines. We've tasted some Riojas on the show before. In California, you find it in Dry Creek Valley in Sonoma County, and you find it up in the Mendocino Lake County areas as well too, and that's where we're going to be tasting another wine from. So without further ado, let's start. Our first wine is a 2005 Corbière from Col Des Vents. Now, Corbière is one of a series of Appellation Contrôlée, or specific appellation wines, coming over from a larger area called the Languedoc-Roussillon, which is sort of the breadbasket of Carignan production in the southern western part of France. I would always look for, rather than a straight Languedoc wine, for one of these appellations, and Corbière is probably about the best that Carignan gets, and it's usually part of a blended wine with Grenache and other varietals, but Carignan will always drive the blend by law. The wine on the nose is full of spice, pepper, a slight meatiness to it, and a sort of rusticity that you get. On the palate, it is pure Carignan. It is peppery, it's a bit gritty in texture, it has bright acidity, it has a nice concentration of flavor, and a lot of that sort of plum and dark berry character, and it's a delicious glass of wine. It's everyday priced, so probably worth going out and getting a couple of bottles of. Corbière, as a general rule, is going to be worth seeking out in finer wine stores and in independent retailers, because you're not necessarily going to find them in your Costco's or in your Bevmos or in your larger grocery stores, but definitely worth seeking out. Our second wine today is a Carignan from Frick Winery, and this particular wine, you'll notice when you saw the label that it has an E at the end, and Carignan in France never has an E on the end. Carignan in America very often has an E on the end, so it's the exact same grape. Don't let that fool you. Here, right off the bat, we have, again, the same sort of berry, brambly character of wood. You get a little bit more of a sort of vanillin and a sweet spice note from the oak barrels that this wine has obviously spent some time in. More of a blue fruit than a black or red fruit, and a little bit more refinement, not so much of that sort of paysan or rustic character that we found in the French version a little bit earlier. This wine clearly has a riper, sweeter fruit character to it. It's not actually sweet, but the fruit is somewhat riper in the palate, and it adds a little bit of a nuance of sort of juiciness or voluptuousness to it. Still a bit peppery. The tannins are a little bit softer, not quite as gritty and hard as the French version, and a little bit more mouth-filling, but still long and quite tasty. This wine carries a slightly higher price tag, but it's still kind of squat right in the middle of the premium price point. As far as food goes, rustic is definitely the word, and I love Carignan and Carignan-based wines with stews, braises, cassoulets, daubes, things like that. They're sort of meal-in-a-pot type preparations. This wine holds up really well. As you can imagine, it holds up well with a lot of just red meat in general, but also I like it with poultry, but I like it with poultry with a punch, so things more along the line of squab and not so much quail are probably a better way to go here. What I do like Carignan with too is cheese. Actually, if you're putting together a nice cheese assortment and have a range of sort of semi-hard or semi-soft cheeses, not necessarily the pungent blues, but a nice range of cheeses, you'll find Carignan is a very happy camper. And in some cases, it's in part and parcel of the dessert wine that you find down in southwestern France. And if you can find one of those, they go really well with chocolate. So anyway, that's about it for wine and food. But before we leave, as always, our Wine Couch word of the week. And the Wine Couch word of the week this week is Minervois. Now, Minervois is an appellation wine much like Corbière, and it's produced in a similar style, Carignan-driven wine. But the reason that I bring it up is Minervois is probably an easier wine to find at the market than Corbière is going to be. Always represents a good value for money and is probably a slightly more approachable style. Obviously producer dependent, but that's generally what I find. That's all the time we have for this episode. Until next time, go out, check out a little bit of Carignan, and have a good hearty stew for the winter. Until next time, take care.